I want to make a video right now about some comments Jon Stewart made recently on his show, right after the NRA convention. Some things he said about gun rights and some things that were done at the NRA convention that he didn't agree with. Now, I will say that I did agree with a lot of the things he said about the NRA convention, but that's a different video altogether, and I'll probably do one on that this week. But first, I wanted to address some specific things he said that really bothered me. Now, one thing that always seems odd to me is how some people can seem... even though I know he's a comedian, he usually comes across as a pretty intelligent guy. Pokes fun at both sides, usually more the right than the left. But the things he says, I can always usually back up with some sort of fact. I can see like, okay, he's looked at things, he's made a reasonable decision, and that's his opinion. But these people that do this, there's a whole bunch of them that I respect their opinions on most things, but then it seems like when it comes to gun rights, they just lose their fucking minds, and they lose their ability to look at things rationally, and they lose their ability to reason. And I just don't understand that, but it seems like Jon Stewart might be one of those in this case. Now I'm going to address some things he said separately, and I'm going to save the worst one for last. But what I want to start with is he said something about the NRA convention and how he was pointing out the hypocrisy because in some instances they were saying, you can't allow the government to have too much power because the government will abuse that power, and how the founding fathers knew that eventually the government would come for our guns and we had to do what we could to stop that. But then he turns around and says, well, because when we were praising the government's actions during the Boston bombing and afterwards, he said that that's hypocritical. He said, well, which is government? Is it good or is it bad? Get your story straight before you come out. I'm like, I know you're pushing the boundaries for comedy and it's supposed to be funny, but even you should surely be able to understand that it's quite possible to say, I believe in my government. I personally do believe in my government. I believe we have a republic that is for the people and of the people, and I think it's one of the best governments in the world. Do I think it needs some tweaking and some fixing? Yeah, of course it does, and it needs some people kicked out of it. But I can stand here and say, I support my government. But I can also stand here and say, and I'll support them as long as I can verify everything they're doing. And as long as I can make sure they don't take a position where they could abuse their power. When it goes that far, I can still be supporting my government, but I can also recognize that at some time, governments almost always try to abuse their power, and it's my business, it's my responsibility as part of that government of the people to try and prevent that from happening. So I can say the government is sometimes good and the government is sometimes bad, and that is not hypocritical. The other thing he said is this common thing that people keep saying that, oh, you can just buy a gun on the internet with no background check whatsoever. And that's just not true. It is a complete and total lie. Usually you vet your stuff before you say it. Did you vet this before you say it? Because that is just a lie. If I go online right now, buy from an online retailer or buy from anyone that doesn't live near me, I can't get that gun without a background check. Because if they live out of state, they by law have to send it to an FFL before I can pick it up. And even if they live in state, but say they're 6 hours away and we can't get it to each other other than ship it, well, there's no carrier that will ship it to anyone other than an FFL. It has to be sent UPS overnight, and they will only ship to an FFL. So you're not going to get it shipped that way either, unless you're shipping it to yourself, and that's not what's going on there. So that's not happening. You can't buy guns over the internet without a background check unless you're doing it face to face. But if they say, oh, well, you can buy a gun face to face with no background check, it doesn't seem as daunting because that takes that anonymity out of it. It's not some faceless person on the internet buying a gun. It's me looking at someone I probably know through name or reputation because they're local to me. And I meet with them, and I can check their driver's license. I can check if they have a carry card, and I can just feel that guy out and say, this seems like an okay guy, or he doesn't set off any red flags for me, so I trust selling this guy a gun. It's not anonymous. It's not without any kind of vetting whatsoever. But see, that doesn't sound dangerous, so they can't say that, so they have to go with that whole lie of you can just buy a gun off the internet anonymously with no background check. Now, the next to the last thing he said that I'm going to talk about is he talked about how 55 senators voted for this. 55, that's the majority. Our democracy was circumvented by this filibuster. Well, for one, we don't have a democracy, we have a republic. And it was designed specifically for cases where the slight majority is wrong. The slight majority is doing something they shouldn't do. There are still things in place that the minority, when they are correct, can still fight back and prevail. That is our government not failing, but succeeding. That is the way our government is designed. Surely you know that. You talk about that all the time. So why now, when it suits your needs, for that to be a failure, is it a failure? That is hypocritical. And then the final thing you said that really, really bothered me. You talked about, well, all we want to do is make sure who's a good guy and who's a bad guy before we sell them a gun. Well, that sounds almost reasonable, and you can almost win people over with that. But then you go a little too far. And like I say, I know you're pushing things for comedy, but you weren't coming across as funny. You were coming across as smarmy when you said this. You were coming across as just kind of a whiny jackass, kind of a douche, actually. And you said, you made this statement when you were talking about good guys and bad guys and who's good and who's bad, and you made this comment of, well, what if we sell a gun to a good guy who later becomes a bad guy? There's where you're caught. There's where your own bias shows through. Because are we supposed to assume that, well, we can't really sell to anybody? Because even if you sell to a good guy, they might become a bad guy. Because that's the reality of it. A lot of people who commit gun crimes are not criminals before they commit the gun crime. So you can't go punishing people for being a criminal who aren't criminals yet. And you can't punish people who are never criminals for the guy who wasn't a criminal until he got his gun and did something wrong with it. That's not how our society works. We don't prevent crime by treating everybody as they're guilty and circumventing people having their rights because they might someday be guilty of a crime. So that thing that you said, that whole, even if they're a good guy now, once they get a gun, they might be a bad guy later. That was douchey. That was the biggest douchey comment I've ever heard you make on your show. So, even though I like you, and even though I've liked your show, I don't really watch it anymore. I got a little preachy for me. But, I never had anything against it. I enjoyed it. I liked it. And I still catch bits of it here and there. But when you said that, I'm left sitting here saying, like, wow, is Jon Stewart really a reasonable person? Is he really a really funny comedian? Or is he just a douche?